The following is a lecture from Professor Ken Czerwinski of MIT, helping us to understand radiation and radioactivity. Dr. Czerwinski is a doctorate in chemical engineering. He specializes in the effects of radiation on the chemistry of our universe, which is everything that we are, organic and inorganic. Dr. Czerwinski has a long list of publications to his credit at a young age. It is important for us to know about radiation to make assessments on matters such as nuclear power, nuclear waste, and the radiation humans produce for an increasing number and variation of uses. At this point in the lecture, Dr. Czerwinski is explaining the kinds and sources of radiation. Please listen.
And then an alpha particle is a helium nucleus. It's just a small nucleus emitted from a larger nucleus. And those are your main flavors of radiation.
Okay, and so some of them are just naturally occurring in the environment in relatively very small amount. There are particles in elements.
Well, you have a natural background level that, in fact, we've evolved with it. The natural background level is from things like uranium or even elements like potassium. There's an isotope. There's one of the types of potassiums radioactive. So in fact, when I have my gamma scan on my body, and I can see where the potassium level is due to the radiation that's coming from my body.
Oh, I see. Is that a kind of scan that is common to medical procedure, or is it specific?
No, I've done it just because I was in a facility
where you could do it.
Where I could do it.
And you weren't worried about having...
Oh, no. No. I was, in fact, I'd be worried if I didn't have potassium.
In other words, no, this did nothing to add radioactive energy or put the waves into your body.
Oh,
what it did is just read energy that's already there.
In fact, I did bring some sample of something radioactive.
Oh my! Well, don't put it too close to me, but let's see it anyway. If you can guarantee that this won't harm me.
I can guarantee it. In fact,
it looks so harmful.
it's uranium glass. From the 1700s up until in the United States up until World War II, it's very common to get to produce glass with uranium in it, and the main reason is you get a nice yellow color. In fact, you can go into antique shops and purchase this today, and I like it because, you see, that's one reason I like chemistry, is because I like colors. And the uranium has different sorts of colors. The radiation has nothing to do with the colors. The colors just has to do with the uranium and the chemical form that it's in. And the way we can tell it's radioactive, practically the only way I can tell it's radioactive, is I take some sort of meter and I put it up next to it, and I can hear it. Okay, now the part about this that's glass is just regular glass that normally doesn't have any radioactive... No, in fact, if you think about it, let's say, leaded crystal or cobalt glass, all they're doing is putting the element lead in there. That gives it a little bit more durability. Oh, I see. And the cobalt gives it the color. They put the uranium in here because they like the color. It made a difference to the glass. Right. I see. And so it's pretty valuable, is it, in antique stores? No, just something. And it doesn't harm you at all to be touching something like that? Nope. No. Nope. So tell me about levels of radiation, why some radiation can be around us and we wouldn't know it's here. We might feel some ill effects, or it might be so small that we don't feel ill effects, but we might get the aftermath of a reaction, and we'd feel the ill effects, or we could actually see a huge explosion that caused radiation. What's the difference in all those? Well, it has to. Normally, say low-level background radiation, just natural radiation. Since we've evolved with it, it's something that our body has a coping mechanism for. And that's mainly, with radiation, you would be worried about damage to your DNA if you were to, and that's always the path where you would see that radiation would be harmful, because it would damage your DNA. Perhaps, that could start a cancer. How come it doesn't damage something else, like just other cell? Why the DNA of the cell? Why not? Let's say the nucleus of the cell, or the cell itself. Because the cell itself, yeah. What you're interested in, let's say there's two types of damages radiation or any chemical could do. One, it could mutate your cell, so that what comes next isn't, it's like a cancer, so something that would be lethal, or it could kill off your cell, right? Now, if it kills off your cell, it would have to kill off enough of your cells so that the organ stopped functioning. So that would be much more of an acute level of radiation. So let's say any sort of insult that you would have to the body, chemical radiation. If you had enough of it in a short period of time, it would be acute, and that could damage your organs. And for instance, with radiation, the cells that get damaged tend to be ones that are multiplying rapidly because their DNA is much more susceptible to the damage. That's also why cancer cells are susceptible to radiation therapies, because they're multiplying rapidly. So if you were to...
So let me just say, it just happens to be the way things are that rapidly multiplying cells are more affected by radiation than ones that don't multiply?
Generally speaking.
Generally
right.
speaking.
And that has to do with the fact, and it's not the radioactive particle itself that hits the cell that really causes the damage. Most of the damage is when the radiation is traveling through the cell and it's interacting with water, it makes radicals. And you might have heard of, radicals.
I've heard of radicals,
Definitely.
and we see this a lot. We have here someone tonight who's very interested in organic food and alternate cures. And if you do something about those, they talk about radicals.
Right, exactly. So the radicals that are formed...
What are radicals,
what
besides people that take over buildings? Okay.
Radicals are, let's just say, if they are generally chemical compounds that can rapidly react with materials around them. So, for instance, you know how that a chemical, like some sort of molecule, will generally have electrons going around? Well, radiation can come in and remove some electrons. And those electrons can actually go into solution, and then the molecule that's left is really looking for another electron. So it can interact with whatever happens to be around if it's inside your body.
But not in a normal fashion.
Right.
It
And what
wouldn't be a normal
it'll
reaction.
basically try to take the electron away. And that free electron that's in solution
Yes.
can do the same thing. It can react with other chemicals that are around. So imagine where the damage would come into play if you have cells that are being exposed to radiation, and the radiation goes through the cell. Cells are mainly water. We're mainly water. Radicals are being formed. And radicals are just being formed close enough to the organelles in the cell or the DNA in the cell where they get damaged. So that's where...
And they send out the instructions for the normal workings of the cell, and they get messed up, so to speak, and bingo, you got a problem.
It's a process where if you had a single strand of the double helix would be broken, or a double strand and it couldn't be repaired, then perhaps there would be a mutation. So you can see where that's... So the idea is, if you wanted to have radiation protection, you want to limit that probability of occurring.
And if they outright kill, is it they just literally cause...
Well, if the cell is killed by radiation, then obviously there will be no...
It just makes it die. It can be so massive it can make many, many cells die.
Right. And then if you had a large enough dose like that, what you could do is eventually destroy the tissue or destroy the organ itself. In fact, it was, I believe, a few years ago at a reprocessing facility. No, it wasn't a reprocessing facility. A facility in Japan where they had a criticality event occur. There was no shielding. The workers had very, very large exposures, extremely large. And they had acute exposures, and they had problems with, for instance, their digestive system, because your digestive system has rapidly dividing cells. And that's an example of an acute exposure. And a chronic exposure, the long-term exposure, could be things like people who worked in the nuclear industry since the 1950s, people who worked maybe for the Department of Energy, and perhaps they were in reprocessing facilities, and they had a very, very long-term exposure. Day by day,
starting these pathologicals or abnormal processes in the cell, and those things accumulate and build upon each other.
Well, it would be more of acquiring a dose. So imagine this.
Really?
Yeah. Well, imagine what I described, where the particles are going through.
Yes.
Well, the more, let's say, each particle going through has some probability, however small, of reacting, of causing damage to the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the more particles I see, the higher my probability is, generally speaking. That, and in fact, that's so. There's a concept called the linear response, where the damage, let's say the damage or threat of damage, or probability of damage, is directly proportional to how much radiation one sees.
So when you take in very minuscule amounts of radiation, it may do no damage in theory. Some radiation from even a radioactive source that's not normally you know, out there, a man-made source, shall we say.
For instance, if I were to eat plutonium.
Oh my.
Well, I wouldn't. Not that I would do that.
No, but let's say,
But let's say. You see, it's not the radiation itself. It's the fact that it's a chemical. It's an element that is radioactive. So if I were to ingest plutonium, then I would imagine that the most common chemical form that I would ingest would be something like an oxide. It would pass through me like a rock, because a rock is like an oxide. So plutonium oxide is like iron oxide. It'd be like eating that. Maybe not. Maybe iron's not the best example, because the body does
use
absorb,
yeah.
But you would actually, most of the plutonium would go through your body. So your dose would be only as it was passing through. Now that'd be very different if I was in an area and let's say the plutonium caught on fire.
Yeah.
And it became an aerosol in the air, and then I were to inhale it. That would mean that it would just be like, smoking, where particles get in your lung and they sit there. That's one of the theories behind why you can get cancer from smoking, is that you just get toxic material sitting on your lungs. Well, imagine if that toxic material is plutonium, it'll just sit lodged in your lungs and then emit radiation. Or the other way.
So it is sort of cumulative in the sense that day by day, free radicals are being formed, and
it's not. Well, it depends upon. You see, it's very specific to the element that's radioactive, and it also depends upon how I get it in. For instance, like if I were to ingest it, certain elements, if I ingest,
they're going to pass.
Will go right through me. Certain things, for instance, there's a isotope that's produced from fission called strontium,
right?
And it's similar to calcium. So you could guess that if I ate it, it would go where calcium goes in my body. So some of it would go into my bones and into my teeth, which would mean that it would stay. It would get tied up in there and stay within me. So you could call it biological half-life, how long something stays in you. There's also an isotope of hydrogen, tritium, which is radioactive, but its most common form is water. The water doesn't stay in my body very long at all. So if I were to get exposed to tritium, that's one way to deal with that is to
flush.
Exactly, flush yourself.
Well, let's say it were strontium in the air. So then, given that a person then it's sitting there, the more of it that were sitting there, if you had a higher exposure than another person, the more of it sitting, being toxic, would cause more adverse reactions, more destruction of DNA, in theory.
In theory, right?
In
theory. There's two schools of thought. One is that the amount that you're exposed to, let's say the amount of part, is directly proportional to how much
destruction.
Right. And then there's another theory which says that there's a threshold that has to be reached. That basically, if you're below this threshold, your body can deal with it. And right now, that's a big area of research, because we honestly don't know it. But the regulations that we use are based upon a linear threshold.
And probably, I would say, you might not, but probably a debate would be going on about this, because we want to rationalize how much radiation a body can stand in an era where radiation is getting increasingly around us in our environment. I would think that would be a cause of why that even came into existence as an idea.
Well, the reason for it is when we started in the nuclear industry. You're exactly right. Prior to people working with radiation, it wasn't an issue.
Can radiation ever be beneficial? In other words, can it make you feel better somehow, or does it always, if it sits in the body and not pass through, destroy a little bit? Depending on the degree.
Well, I mean, if I had cancer and I was doing
that way, only to destroy.
Well, if I was doing that, but as far as some sort of
Purely
pick-me-up.
health, no.
Well, actually,
The sun, isn't it said that the sun is a source of radiation?
well, the sun is.
What kind of rays is?
Well, all sorts.
all kinds of rays.
As far as radiation coming from the sun, I mean, we feel the radiation every day
Yes,
from the sun.
yes.
But we also, and as far as from space, there's a lot of radiation there. We're protected by the atmosphere, and I mean that's why you have the aurora borealis and the ionosphere. You have reactions of particles as they come in. In fact, if one of the current research areas is if we were to send people to Mars, is how they would deal with an increased exposure to radiation, because there would be no
Shield.
there'd be no natural
protection.
shielding. So you could either make it so that the spaceship
Is shielded.
is shielding, but you can't make a huge spaceship with lead shielding because it would be too difficult.
heavy.
Yeah, too heavy to
And
shoot
it must be so much radiation that you'd really need to make it.
Well, it's not, as far as I don't know if, with all the problems of going to space with weightlessness, I'm not sure that the radiation would be the most problematic.
It's not that big. Yeah.
But there is an interesting story. When they first started sending astronauts into space, they were reporting that as they were sleeping, they would see flashes, or as their eyes were closed, they would see flashes of light. And what that appears to be is that cosmic rays are going through, hitting the retina, and activating. But then again, it's something that we don't normally see on Earth because we're protected by the atmosphere.
Yes. Okay. So, so the radiation from the sun is the rays are coming on us, but they're not harming us because of protection. Because by the time they get to us,
there's a large range of energies from the sun. We know about different light, UV and gamma rays, which X-rays and gamma rays are just on the same spectrum. But we tend, as far as ultraviolet light, visible light, infrared, we go beyond the ultraviolet, and we know that ultraviolet can be bad for you. Well, the gamma rays are just more energetic than that. But most of and as far as cosmic rays or larger particles, the atmosphere certainly does protect us from that.
So we're not really that exposed to. Well,
what we get exposed to on Earth is the natural elements that are here that are radioactive, potassium and uranium. In fact, it's a large variation depending upon the geographic location. Also, when you do go higher in the atmosphere, whether you're living in Denver versus Boston or you're flying in a plane, your dose will increase.
Okay. Is all potassium radioactive?
No, only a small percentage.
So some that's in your body is a small percentage?
Right. Well, the thing is that there's every element. Well, not every element. Well, okay. Every I question myself too much.
It's complex stuff.
Every element has isotopes, and many elements have stable isotopes. Many different stable isotopes, and what they are, they're the same. They have the same chemical properties, and in the nucleus they have the same number of protons but different number of neutrons. So for potassium, there's a number of different isotopes. One of them happens to be radioactive, and it's very long-lived. Because if you think about how old the Earth is, it's about 4.5 billion years old. Any radioisotope with a half-life that's on the order of 1 billion years will still be here even from the beginning of the time of the Earth. So if something was originally here when the Earth was made, as long as the half-life is on the order of billions of years, it'll still be around.
Yeah.
If it's not produced.
So say you, but
no, it's true.
I know. Billions of years. That's a lot of years. I know another thing now. Small energy and large energy. A very crude way of putting it, but some of this radioactive energy is like just seems to have like a short length, I guess, or it can't penetrate very much, and it doesn't seem to make a big impact pound for pound. I don't know on what scale you would put it. Whereas some of the other energy is more powerful. I mean,
well, they're actually, if something doesn't penetrate,
yes,
that actually means it deposits all its energy in a very small area. For instance, I could, if we had an alpha source on the floor, and I would take my counter and measure the alpha coming off of it. If I took a piece of paper and put it over there, I couldn't measure it anymore. Because the alpha particle deposits most of its energy, and it wouldn't
very
make
close
it through.
to it.
Right.
And the other one can travel
Right.
further.
So, for instance, a gamma ray, which is a photon, can pass through many things. So when they do, for instance, X-rays, right? Those.
Do those go through the walls too, or do they, how far can they travel?
Well, you know, what they tend to do is put shielding.
Yeah, around
So-
you. Does it really contain it?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It just stops in the lead?
Right,
And lead
right.
is what? Lead is able to contain it because...
Well, any element, the heavier the element is,
Yeah.
the more it can react, the more it can, as a photon is going through
Yeah.
it, the more it can react with it.
Okay.
We choose lead because lead is heavy and relatively cheap.
Okay. All right. So now, when it comes to a nuclear explosion, and then either through a bomb or even in fission, I don't know if that's the same thing as an explosion.
Well, I mean,
not necessarily.
a weapon,
Yeah.
when you have a nuclear weapon, it's fissioning.
It's fissioning.
Right.
Okay.
But there's also, I'll just talk about the fissioning weapon.
Okay,
There's-
fissioning. Okay. What about fissioning now? That's a powerful thing.
Okay. In fact, if you look at, I mean, that's why you can think about the power this way. Any sort of explosion, whether it's chemical or nuclear, we can think about how that energy gets released. And in fact, you know, we could talk about, well, what if we had a tanker full of gasoline and we blew that up? But we can slowly burn it off and push a car for 300 miles. So that's a lot of energy. And on the same way, let's say about a gram of uranium-235, special isotope of uranium, has about, let's say, comparable amount of energy as train cars full of coal. And the reason for that is that one is getting its energy from splitting the nucleus, so it's a nuclear process, and coal gets its energy from burning, so it's a chemical process. And so there's orders of magnitude difference in those energies.
Okay, so the energy unleashed from a nucleus is the most powerful that we are capable of producing, or is that not true?
I mean, as far as per event, yeah. Yeah. I mean, as far as per just one atom or molecule,
It could be very
right,
small.
right. But if you were, yeah.
But pound for pound, like microscopically, it's very, the way...
Right. Well, it's because it's, the radiation relies upon the weak nuclear force, and burning is let's say, electromagnetic. More of an they're different, of the forces of nature. There's different forces, and the nuclear one is much more energetic.
So we use uranium-235 as our source to make the nuclear fission happen. This is the source material.
Right.
What do we do to it to make it? We try to cause it to fission.
Right.
What do we do to it to make it fission? What do we apply to it?
All we use is we bring in some neutrons, and we can have a neutron source, or if I put enough of it together, there's a spontaneous or natural emission of neutrons, and I can get enough of that together where it will naturally go critical. In fact, there was about 1.5 billion years ago in Gabon, in Africa, where Africa is today, there was a reactor that was naturally critical because the amount of uranium-235 was sufficiently high so that you could have a criticality event. And the reason that they can determine that these reactors operated, these natural reactors were operating, is that they can look at, as we talk about the isotopes, how much uranium-235 is in with the uranium. It should be 0.7%. It was much lower. So they knew that something had happened to that, and then they could look for fission products. So when the neutron hits it, it splits, and it splits into two elements. And they could look for some of those elements, and they can see an enrichment in those. So also knowing the geometry, something about the area, something about the density of the material, how much material was there, you could calculate that something at a criticality occurred.
Deductive inferential reasoning kind of thing. But anyway, back into the reactor now where the uranium would be fissioning, if we could be inside there, which we never would because we would die. We'd die instantly, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
That'd be pretty gross.
Well, I'd also
I don't
say
know.
that the 500-degree water would probably...
Okay, is that what it is? Okay. All right. So what would we see if we could witness it firsthand, if we were in there looking at it? Would we see anything?
Oh,
Would we
actually,
see?
you can stare into a reactor.
You can.
And you can see this blue glow
Yeah.
that's given off. It's called Cherenkov
A glow?
radiation.
Yeah.
Right. And that has to do with particles going through water and how they're emitting light as they're traveling through water.
And that's what we would see.
Right.
Not smoke, not fire,
Nope.
nothing like that. Just a glow.
Right.
Okay.
And all one does is
it's a lot of energy.
Right.
Right there. And then
well,
it's
the glow isn't from the energy.
no, the
yeah.
glow is natural to the
Right.
photons. Did you
Right.
say?
It's beta particles.
Beta particles. Okay. All right. So now this energy is contained at that point, right? Or
well, what happens is during the fission process is that heat is given
generated.
off.
Okay.
Right. And then that heat is transferred out of the core into the water, and that water is heated up, and that's used to turn a turbine. Either mainly what happens is that you have the water heated up, it goes to something where the heat is exchanged, and then that heated water is then used to turn a turbine. So you have a primary coolant loop.
Okay. All right. So now, now what about the water that's I guess circulating around the whatever the reactor or the core?
Yeah.
The core.
Let's say it would go through the core.
Yeah.
It would heat up. You would transfer the heat.
Does it become radioactive? I mean, the water's shielded, right? It's protected against the radiation,
water,
or does it touch
right,
it?
because the fuel is placed in material that doesn't dissolve in water very easily. So, but saying that the water isn't radioactive isn't necessarily true.
Of course not.
Because you always have some problems with the fuel. Sometimes under rare, some instances the fuel will crack. That doesn't happen very often. But you also get with these neutrons that are coming out, the neutrons that are running the reaction, some of them will come out from the reactor, and then they will react with whatever happens to be around. If it's water, perhaps there's something in the water it'll react with, or if there's steel, it'll react with the steel.
The water's contained, but it can get right through whatever's containing it, right? Or does the water actually...
The water actually...
flows right
Well, actually,
right over
the water
stuff?
for the neutrons acts as a shield.
Oh, my.
Yeah, so the water is a shield.
Wow. So then what happens to this water, Dr. Czerwinski?
The water? Well, the water, I mean, some of it captures the neutron. Mainly what happens is the neutron slows down.
But I mean, what happens to the water once the whole process has sort of, been used and finished?
You mean, what do you do with the cooling water?
Exactly.
Well, generally what's done with cooling water is when you want the water to be very clean, very pure, so you try to purify it, a number of different chemical methods to separate out any materials that are in it. But at the end, as far as what you would do with the water, you have an increase in the amount of tritium that you make in the water, so helium-3 from the water. You also have an increase of deuterium, because you start out mainly with just helium-1. If I add a neutron to that, I make helium-2. We call that deuterium. Deuterium isn't radioactive. It's a stable isotope of the hydrogen. Now, what the problem would be is that if you make the hydrogen-3, I think I was saying helium, I meant hydrogen. I'm not. But the hydrogen-3, the tritium, is radioactive. And that's not with a light water reactor, with a normal water reactor. You don't wind up making as much of the tritium as one does with a heavy water reactor, where your water is already starting out as the hydrogen-2, as the deuterium. But what do you do with the water?
What do you do with the water? And is all of it acting as a shield or not protected? I thought the water was encased to do the cooling.
Well, it's
against the material that's emitting the particles.
But the particles, as the neutrons are being emitted, you want to slow them down because they're going very rapid. If you slow them down, they will interact with the uranium better. You want to what's called moderate them. So you slow them down, the water will do that for you. At the same time, the water is also being heated up and carrying heat away. And since I have a loop, I can always bring some more in.
And steam is being generated.
Well,
too?
it depends.
No?
It depends. You can make a reactor where you can generate. I mean, yeah, you can make a reactor where you can boil the water directly, or you just keep it under pressure, and it gets very hot, but it can remain a liquid. So there are different types.
Really?
Yeah.
How hot can it get and remain a liquid? Only within...
Well, it depends. It's based upon the fact that if I put enough pressure...
Oh,
so
really?
Let's say
Pressure is another variable.
Well, then let's say if I took a tin can full of water and I heated it up, what would eventually happen?
Oh, it can't really
boil. It would
boil.
explode.
Yeah,
because
I see.
The pressure would just increase until that broke.
I see.
And in essence, a reactor core is, you know, if you have it sealed like that, that's in essence what it is.
Okay, so then where is the water when it's used up and they want fresh water, which must have... Where does the water come from? The faucet, a tap?
Well, yeah.
Where does it come from?
That same water.
Evian? Evian?
Yeah.
You said pure.
Well, it's pure in the sense, actually, you know, natural water has
impurities, exactly.
Right,
okay.
Right. Like, for instance, you wouldn't want sodium in your water. You wouldn't want high concentrations of sodium. Or you wouldn't want things that would corrode the pipes, right? You wouldn't want chlorine.
Okay.
You wouldn't want things that get radioactive and stay around for a while. So what you would wind up doing is you would filter the water to make sure there's not particles in it. And then when you're done with the reactor, let's say you're shutting down the reactor, you would see what the concentrations of the tritium are, the concentration of the tritium, and you would have to either treat it or discharge it according to regulation.
Where is it discharged if it is?
Well, they haven't shut down many reactors.
Oh boy! So we've got water. Yeah. How much water are we talking about? Would it fill this room?
Well, as far as a core.
Yeah. It would easily fill this room.
Fill this room. But really,
and it's used over and over again a lot.
Right.
I see. So it cools down.
Right.
Do they have cooling areas for it?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when you see a cooling tower, where
I don't see them. So I mean, if I see a plant, I kind of go the other way.
Well, even a coal-fired plant has a cooling tower.
Okay.
The coal plant, as far as the electricity production, it's the same thing. The coal, you take train cars full of coal, and you burn that, as opposed to a reactor where you take some uranium and you stick it in there and you boil the water. In fact, a coal-fired plant emits more radiation than a nuclear plant.
Okay, and I heard the water is sometimes gotten out of the bodies of water that are around.
Right.
So like lakes or directly instead of like through the faucet or something's made to like get it out of directly out of there.
It would depend upon how much material you're using. There were some reactors built early on where they took water out of a body of water.
And they put it back into?
Well, what they would do is they would put it into a holding pond, and mainly they put it into a holding pond because it was thermally hot. You wouldn't want to send
hot water into the ocean.
Right.
Definitely not.
Right.
When we know that's been done, and we know that at times a lot of fish have landed belly up in different places. Not from that necessarily, but
actually, I've been on a lake in a place called Savannah River where they used to do this. And so imagine if you have water coming into the reactor, it goes through, it cools, it goes into a pond, and if there's an accident within the reactor, if there's some fuel leakage, that'll go out into the pond too. And in fact, in this pond that I was on, there was definitely some sediments that had the radiation because things like some of the fission products and some of the transuranics that were produced would bind with the sediment, sit on the bottom of the lake.
Okay. Now, also, as a byproduct or an end result, new kinds of, should we call them elements, are formed? Or elements. Oh, yeah. New kinds of elements are formed, and some of these, most of them, or many of them, are emitting particles.
Right.
Okay.
Right. In fact, that's what I got my PhD on, was making new elements.
Making new elements.
Right.
It's elementary. Okay, now, so now we've got, that's what the nuclear waste is mostly about, right?
Well,
not all of it, but some of what's left over.
The nuclear waste is from the fissioning.
Yeah.
You get things like cesium, strontium, iodine, technetium. you basically get a wide section of the periodic table. And also, when the neutron hits uranium, sometimes it doesn't fission, sometimes it'll just make a new isotope, and that builds up. So you can make things like plutonium that way, americium.
You can make new things out of what's left after one of these reactions, shall we say. Okay, so now, and then you can use plutonium, to make things like bombs, or as another source of dangerous material to be unleashing, or something that itself can...
Well, plutonium is, there's basically two uses for it. You can either, again, from the fission process, I can either make a bomb out of it, or I can make fuel out of it. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't want to...
Because it has an awful lot of energy to give...
Well, it's that, this process, this fissioning process, when I hit it with the neutron, there are certain isotopes of, let's say, uranium and plutonium, some other elements, that are very susceptible to fissioning if I hit it with the neutron. Okay. Some of them, the probability is very small. For some of these isotopes, the probability is very high. So that's why uranium-235, plutonium-239 are used.
Okay, so you say it could be used again to be fissioned, or what was the second use of it?
Oh, well, as far as, you could fission it. You can either fission in a reactor or make a weapon.
Or make a weapon and fission it that. Okay. All right. So now, so anyway, a lot of this waste has radioactive waves and particles giving off energy that can be detrimental to biological, and that includes plant material, like you said. And there it is. And now what?
Well.
And how much of it is there? Like in the whole United States, would it be enough to cover this room many times over, many times?
As far as, I can give you a number.
And there's different levels of how the grades of it.
Let's say the spent fuel from the reactors. I could say it's something like 70,000 metric tons.
Oh boy, that's a lot.
It sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
But this material is very dense.
Yeah.
So actually...
Oh, it weighs a lot per small amount.
Exactly. It's actually
like if I had some, I'd go like this.
Right. It's heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff. So actually, the amount of area that it would need is relatively small. So in a lot of ways...
How much area does it need? Like a school building?
Yeah, something, well...
All of it in the U.S. would fit in the size of a normal school?
Let's say, that's reasonable. I would never put it all together in a normal school for a number of reasons. One, it would be, too much heat would be coming out of it.
I think it'd be good for the kids. No.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, no, but it's about as much as about sort of like that in the whole United States, not counting other countries.
You can count the other countries, and it'd be 4 times as much.
4 times as much. Okay. So where is this stuff now? I remember reading long ago, sometimes they put it in barrels and dumped it down into the ocean. Is that true?
Way back when? Was done. Certainly.
That was done.
Certainly. So now they didn't take the spent fuel and dump it into the ocean. What they would do, they would take, let's say, some process material. No one, to the best of our knowledge,
to your knowledge,
has taken fuel rods and dumped them in the ocean.
What have they done with the fuel rods?
They're all sitting, well, in the United States, they're all sitting at every nuclear power plant in the United States.
What are they packed in?
What you generally do, you keep them in an assembly, and you put them in, most of them are just placed in a spent fuel pool. So they're
in
placed
water? In water.
Right.
Okay, that's not the stuff we're talking about, though, the waste, the fuel rods you're not counting. Are you counting them as part of the cargo that would fit in the school? Okay, the fuel rods. Okay.
Yeah.
What's the material that they made the barrels of when they threw it into the ocean?
Oh, that?
Was that lead or?
No, I mean,
just regular barrels?
And it depends on who you say, who threw it in.
Yeah.
I mean, there were certainly cases of, I've seen barrels that were buried in facilities in the United States that were just...
regular barrels.
Okay,
so what's the problem now? You've got all this radioactive stuff, let's say at military installations and at private installations, and people say big nuclear cleanup. What does that mean? It means there's like tons, but like you say, that means it's smaller in size. I shouldn't say mass, but size. Sitting there and like it can corrode, it keeps on, like the reason it's not cool is because because it's got such particle emissions that are detrimental to life, to biological life, right?
Well, the reason that it's let's say the reason that are you asking why it remains radioactive?
No, I'm asking. People talk about all this radioactive waste sitting around being such a problem, and it being, you know, that a big cleanup, but like you can't just go in and shovel it, throw it on a truck and clean it up. You know, that it's a big problem because...
Well, it mainly has to do with how we can handle it and how we can do it in a cost-effective manner. In the sense of, and also the other problem is, if we make a measurement over there, and we say there's 10 becquerel, and a becquerel is 1 decay per second. Let's say there's 10 decays per second of something over there. Do we clean it up or not? And that's what this whole idea of trying to understand how low-level dose works. Because the reason we can look and think if we want to clean up something depends upon a number of things. What sort of element it is, because they behave differently in the environment. Where it is, if it's likely to go somewhere, and, you know, and what the environment is. It could be, if it's very wet, it'll behave differently than if it's dry.
All right, if it's something we deem is not in our best interest to have us exposed to, what's the big deal about how difficult it is to clean it up? Is it just dangerous?
No, well, the hard thing, actually, if you find stuff that's very radioactive and altogether, that's easy to clean up. You can just, you know what I mean, you can shield yourself, you can pick it up. The problem is, imagine if you take something and then you disperse it. But let's say we disperse it over... I see. You know,
so in these places that are talked about, it's in like all kinds of stuff, like when they've had to untar roads and get benzene out of the earth and
exactly.
Exactly.
And the problem is, imagine even if it started out at a source, but that was 20 years ago, it spread. So the question is...
so that's contamination. There you go.
Right. And as far as contamination, we certainly have some at facilities in the United States. And I've also been at places in the former Soviet Union where they have some real problems there. But the activity levels were extremely robust. But the real question for us, if we want to look at a site and clean it up, a lot of it comes down to trying to make a decision about how much it's going to cost versus what benefit am I going to get from it. And of course, the benefit you're going to get from
I don't go for cost-benefit analysis, but go ahead.
No, but
go ahead. I know that's what's done.
That's what drives it.
I know.
That's what drives
I know.
it.
Go ahead.
That's what drives it. I mean, and I would, you know, I can look at sites and I can say, well, maybe we should clean up this one first, but there's not someone who's screaming about this site. So the benefit of cleaning it up, even though you might say, well, this would, I would say, you know, you can make a calculation, gives you mainly a probability of something occurring. You can say, well, this has a higher probability, but this one is up on people's radar screens, so we'll take care of this one first. And that happens. That happens. And it's something.
This is why we need people to understand what the radiation is, so that we can learn to make judgments. Because none of us understand what it is.
Well, I would say that our literacy about radiation is pretty low.
Well, it isn't that feasible, frankly, to be understood. You know, it should be in the newspapers in a more fundamental way.
I'll tell you what, even when I see stuff in the newspaper from something I had told a reporter, I go,
I know,
I know. And the reason is because it's a very difficult, even the fundamentals have to deal with nuclear physics.
Exactly.
You have to know something about nuclear physics to get the fundamentals.
It's so hard.
It's very difficult.
It's so hard to get a grip on this. Yes, so it's very hard for us to know, and we know too that it's radiation, in brief, is coming at us in many more ways. You know, from it's tiny, irradiating vegetables, all with, you know, and we have to consider the accumulation of all these small doses. Is there some in a smoke detector too?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so these small doses from so many...
But for instance, something in a smoke detector, it's americium-241. It's the element americium, the isotope 241. The way a smoke detector works is that it emits an alpha particle. So if a smoke aerosol comes by, it can ionize that and then you have the battery in there, so you have a charge. It can detect that, and then the smoke detector goes off. But if it's sitting up over there, I'm not so worried about it. Because there's basically 3 things that you need to consider for how something radioactive will affect you. So, for instance, this uranium glass that's sitting there, 1 is how long I sit next to it, right? And 2 is what's between me and it. So if I go like that, my dose is less. If I have some shielding. And 3 is distance. So it falls off rapidly with distance.
But pound for pound, you could have a kind of element that gave off more penetrating rays, right?
Well, not only that, even more of them. If the half-life is shorter, it gives off more activity.
Yeah. So this one happens to be not that much of a threat.
4.5 billion years. So it is the half-life for uranium-238. So we're not. And the other thing is, I mean, it's in the glass, so the alpha particles don't get out of the glass matrix. In fact, glass is one of the waste forms that's used for radioactive waste.
Okay. All right. Now, so I guess, and we're getting ready to close here shortly, I guess that, of course, the whole thing becomes how many ways do you want to devise destruction when it comes to weapons, and this, you know, how many ways can you think of to be more lethal in a wider area to more people with more effect? That would be one question. And the other question is how much you want to keep generating any kinds of materials, and I think especially radioactive ones, any kind of materials that that you're going to use, you know, to feed your energy supply. You know, that's our big question. And where do you? I'll give you the closing thoughts on that. Where do you stand on that? Like, let's keep, you know, I know there's a push now. It's been sort of muted with all the other things. There's been a push to, like, let's reinvigorate the construction of more nuclear power plants, and, you know, there's been a definite push, and let's just go towards this way, and so forth.
Well, you know, and it depends upon, I would say that, you know, that's going to be answered by how our country deals with energy. Nuclear power, the main benefit is that you don't make CO2. The detriment is we have this waste that we don't know, as a society, we haven't decided on how we're going to deal with it. The other thing is that the resources for the energy, we don't have to go across the world to get them. We have them ourselves. And I mean, what drives some of our problems now is us using resources that we don't have.
And not only that, it's a physical universe. You know that better than I. If there's anything that this universe is, it may be nothing at all, but it is physical as far as we can tell, okay? It's a physical universe. And it's not a perfect world, and it's just a matter of time. Of course, there's already been incidents when in a physical universe, things don't operate the perfect way that they're supposed to on paper. And I even read recently about corrosion.
Right, there was a corrosion.
Yeah.
I believe the plant was in Ohio.
Yeah.
Right.
And they didn't, you know, they came upon it serendipitously. Had no clue.
Lucky
you know,
they came upon it.
And now, well, luckily, you know, luck. Luck is, it's physical and luck.
Well,
okay?
I would say luck, but in the sense that the nuclear industry is heavily regulated, and they have many things, many prescribed things that they have to do. So,
aren't we all? The FAA regulates the airline.
But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of...
Of course there is regulation, needless to say. But
not that I'm saying, you
know...
No,
but I'm saying we don't live in a perfect world. We could have the best regulation in the whole world, flawless regulation, and reality being what it is. You know, life being rust. Rust never sleeps is an expression of Neil Young, okay? Just take that as a metaphor for what I'm trying to say. That there's always, you know... So otherwise, we wouldn't be in this universe like we are, banging our heads against the wall, trying to figure things out and making stuff and all that, you know?
But with nuclear power, what I think it comes down to is if we continue to use energy the way we do, we're not going to have a choice because it does appear that global warming, I mean, I have a feeling that, especially living here by the coast, if we keep engaging in this activity... Let's stop using energy the way we're using it. It's absurd the way we're using energy. And let's look at first of all the
easy ways we could drastically cut our energy consumption. And I want to thank Dr. Czerwinski at 37, with all kinds of publications, and kudos to his name: nuclear physics, chemical engineering, nuclear chemical engineering. And thank you very much for being here. It's a very dense subject, no pun intended, a very critical subject, no pun intended.
I hope I exposed more people to radiation.
To the masses, no pun intended, yes. And yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to say in closing, power to the people. Power to the people. Good night, everybody. radiation. Radiation across our nation for corporation. Hey, Mother Earth, radiation for corporation. No other planet can compare. Deliver water, give us air. We love our planet, Mommy Earth. We're gonna keep our gift of birth. No other planet can compare. Deliver water, give us air. We love our planet, Mother Earth. We're gonna keep our gift of birth. Planet, planet Earth, planet, you're ours, all ours, no destruction. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land, this land, this land, this land, this land was made